All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Tangent Podcast. This is our weekly, semi-weekly. Uh, co- what is the term I've been using? Segment. This is our weekly, semi-weekly segment called "Passion as a Business," where we talk to people who are doing what they love for a living, and that's everybody at every stage of the game. Whether you're starting, whether you're feet on the ground in Hollywood, like our first guest was, or people just starting out, and people in the middle. Yeah, all over the place. Anybody that's working on doing what they love for a living. Those watching and listening in the future. This was recorded live on caffeine.tv/T3G Media. We do this live so that we can have live conversation, take questions from the audience. Today, my guest is a high school friend of mine. So I've known this man coming up a long time. I don't know how many years it's been. I don't want to count right now.
It's been a few.
It's been several many years.
Yeah.
And this is Michael Emeritz. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am good. Mike, I've always known you as an artist. I remember you would show me the coolest stuff. Like, I remember you showed me stuff that was very H.R. Geiger-esque even before I knew who H.R. Geiger was. So like I would see H.R. Geiger, I'm like, I've seen this kind of stuff before. Like, this isn't revolutionary to me. Like I've seen this style, this genre of art before. So that to me was always kind of my own little private thing. I was like, I've seen artists like this before, but you are an artist in every sense of the word. You've done traditional 2D pencil on paper. You've done stop motion, which is ridiculous. Like, to me, as a concept, that like the patience required for that is incredible. Let's start all the way at the beginning. When you
Oh,
were
jeez.
a wee young man back in the day, what drew you towards art? Pardon the pun.
Well,
That was unplanned.
that's actually really funny because my mom tells a story all the time. It's a little like kind of anecdotal. Maybe it wasn't necessarily like the first like artist moment, but I think it was sort of like out of necessity, like I almost like as like a problem solving sort of tool. So anyways, the story she always tells is I used to love playing with like Matchbox cars and stuff. My dad was really into them, and he had this like duffel bag full of Matchbox cars from when he was a kid.
Right.
But I was left alone for like a moment. My mom used to work nights, and she would often like fall asleep on the couch, and I'd just kind of be playing around in the living room. I had to have been maybe like 2 or 3 at the time. And when she woke up, I had taken a black magic marker and drawn roads all over the tile in the kitchen and the carpet and just all over the
That's
apartment.
outstanding. That is
So
outstanding.
I think that's safe to say that was my first experience with art and kind of just using it to facilitate something I needed in my life, I guess.
That's
And it's
fantastic.
kind of always been like that ever since. It's I never like set out to be an artist. It was just kind of part of my life, you know. It was something that I really it filled every spare moment of my time. When I got a little bit older than that, like not much more, but again, I used to have to go with my mom to various jobs that she worked. We just didn't have money for a babysitter, and whatever the
Sure.
circumstances were, I would come with mom to work, and she would just put me in this little crib or have somebody keep an eye on me, and I just had crayons and pencils and whatever to keep me busy. And it sort of just embedded that in my mind that like when you have nothing else to do or when you need to occupy your time, this is something that you do. And
Right.
like I had other options. Of course, she gave me like the blocks and toys and whatever, but that was just the stuff that I naturally gravitated towards. I wanted to make little pictures and stuff. And then once I got into like grade school, I started getting super into comics. I think around kindergarten, my mom and my dad started like encouraging me to do better in school and to pay attention more in school because I was always drawing instead of doing what I was supposed to do. So to encourage me to do what I was supposed to do, they would buy me comics during like the
Bribery,
parent
the
teachers
best
conferences or
parenting
whatever.
method.
Yeah, totally. So I started collecting like Ninja Turtles, He-Man comics, G.I. Joe. Eventually, I got around to like X-Men and Spawn and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, it really kind of evolved from that, just the storytelling aspect and just sort of out of necessity. I just felt like I needed it for whatever reason, and I just have never ever stopped. I've switched disciplines occasionally, but it's more or less like I'm just interested in something for a time, and I keep piggybacking off of whatever I've done before. So like you mentioned stop motion, and that was sort of a culmination of a lot of different things. I love drawing, so I did a lot of preliminary sketches and drawings for that. I love sculpting, which I had to do a lot of sculpting for that. I love working with my hands and making like mechanical things, and so I learned how to weld and
Wow.
and how to drill metal and ball bearings and all that kind of stuff to do that. And I love animation. Like that was a real kind of culmination of a lot of stuff. And then set design and stuff too from when I was working in film. But yeah, everything just sort of it's like an endless quest. I don't know. I think it's more of an obsession than anything else. But
Well, that's
but it is
sometimes
it
that's
is
what
what
it
it
is,
is.
right? Sometimes it is about just having to do it. It's not even something that like art. You didn't choose art. Art chose you.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. No, that's a great point too, because there have been times when I wish that I could kind of stop, like, because I love it, and there's nothing that I'd rather be doing, but at the same time, it is kind of isolating sometimes, or at least has been. I think
Sure.
it's a lot less as we've gotten further into the digital age, and you can actually connect with people without necessarily having to leave your studio. That's
True.
huge. That's
Right.
absolutely
That's
huge.
enormous. I mean, I've been part of some of the big art hangouts till the
Hmm.
wee hours of the morning. We're talking to
Hmm.
people on the east coast of Canada, like the Easter than East Coast time, which I didn't even know
Yeah.
that there was more east of the continent.
Yep. In Germany and Australia
Yeah,
and
all over the
Spain and
place.
yeah.
It's
Oh, I
it's
love it. And it's so great being able to connect with people that are interested in what you're interested in from all over the world, and everybody's got different sensibilities and tastes and history and experience and to just at the snap of a finger or the push of a button, I should say, be able to access people like that and to talk to them and pick their brains or just to hang out and talk about nonsense. It's great.
definitely, definitely. I excuse me. I think it's very interesting to see that kind of revolution. When you look at, I was just thinking about this the other day. I was looking at some comics. I was happened to be at my local comic shop, and I was just kind of perusing, and I'm like, there are so many names that I don't know. There are just so many names that I've never heard of, and I think back 10, 15, certainly 20 years. The mid 90s, early 90s, late 80s. There were a handful of artists, like a handful of names. Like
Hmm.
Batman was handled by one of a handful of people. X-Men was one of a handful of people. It was always kind of the same people. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
my joke for a long time, especially like in the 90s and early 2000s about DC is that you could just interchange any artist because it all kind of looked the same. Whereas now there is such a variety across the board. Like you pick up a Green Lantern book this week, it's a completely different artist next week. And I think, like you said, the digital age has brought people together on a huge level.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's great for the industry too. I mean, I love your classic kind of comic style, quote unquote,
Oh,
but I
hands down,
think it's just a breath of fresh air that there's so many different influences going into comics now. I think it's amazing.
for sure.
Especially coloring. Oh my God, coloring has just gotten so much better. It's beautiful.
The kind of stuff that they do with colors now, I forget. I picked up something yesterday, and it was kind of, I don't know, remember what book it was, but I flipped it open. And I'm like, oh, they went with the like pencils straight to colors, and
Mm,
really back in the day, you couldn't have done that. Welcome, Lord
no.
Rampant Hump, to the broadcast. We're speaking with Michael Emeritz. He's an artist from the Chicago area. I've actually known him since high school, but he's a professional artist. He currently has, and this is going to be the next thing I brought up. That's him right there, Space Cat 462. He currently is working on a comic book series called Space Cat, and Thank
Well,
you, Lord Raymond Hump. I appreciate that. Um, he is also working on something. Can we talk about the submissions?
uh, I mean,
Not at
yeah, like
length, but
in
you're
general,
submitting to some stuff, to some
yeah.
big name stuff.
Well, like submitting and getting accepted are two different things,
Sure.
but yeah, in general, we can kind of touch on it, but I don't want to get too deep into
Certainly,
to
certainly,
anything about
certainly.
it yet. But yeah, I'm working on a series of shorts actually that I'm submitting to Heavy Metal Magazine, which is um, I kind of glossed over that part of my history, but that was a huge part of me being exposed to comics and getting interested in comics because I love superheroes. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
what really made me want to make comics was things that weren't quite in that same realm. So honestly, things like Earthworm Jim and Doug TenNapel, for some reason that sort of aesthetic really appealed to me at the time. But as far as comics, heavy metal showed me that hey, you can make comics that don't have to look like these streamlined kind of superhero books that you see,
Definitely.
and that blew my mind. And since then, I've just been an enormous fan. And I think also it had a little bit to do with like how young I was, and I probably shouldn't have been reading it at the time. And so there's that kind of
It was a
mystique,
little
you know.
something just like the next age range.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm reading this and no one else on the playground knows about it.
Ha ha! You're reading
But
Archie? Heavy metal.
yeah. But I had a bit of an advantage because my dad had a comic shop for a couple years when I was a kid. So we used to get heavy metals in all the time. And once in a while, there'd be one out of the bag, either like under the counter or in the back someplace. And I'd sneak off into like the back alley and like just read it as, as much as I could before I got caught. So,
That's
but
great. That's stuff like that is definitely huge, especially because of the impact of that. Like you said,
oh, yeah.
there is this streamlined, sleek look that mainstream books provide. That if you're an artist and you don't really fit into that mold and you don't really create stuff that looks like that, you could definitely feel discouraged by the medium itself. Everything that
Oh,
comes
yeah.
out is really kind of polished. And I mean, I was looking at even like horror books, like straight up books that are supposed to be horror, Friday the
Hmm.
13th books. They're just really clean and polished, and they look like, this I don't know, like, I call them pretty books. Like you've got artists that are just create pretty books. Aspen Comics, for instance, for me, is the pretty comic book company.
Hmm.
Everything they put out is gorgeous. Even if like it's like, oh, big angry monster, gorgeous. Like like there's no grit, there's no texture. And that's the thing with like heavy metal and a lot of that, like stuff like that kind of led me into being way more accepting of indie books. Because I'll be honest, like in the 90s when I really first started reading comics, when I would get a book that was kind of like not that polished style, that was more of a gritty, more textured, like heavier use of cross hatching, like deeper inks, things like that,
Hmm.
I would throw me off, and I'd be like, I don't know if I like this.
Yeah.
But then, like, I would be exposed to like I have I think one issue of heavy metal. I've had it for years at this point. I don't even know how long I've had it, but it's one of those things that like I go through it and I'm like, man, there's so much story here. There's so much depth, and that all kind of plays in with the style. So then like it kind of broadened my scope and broadened my senses as far as what indie was and what what you could get out of it. Because to me,
Yeah.
back in the day, like in the '90s, indie was Image, which was really just another polished company.
Oh yeah, that I was just gonna say, like in the 90s and before then, indie comics almost meant like underground, you know? Like
Right,
you would have to be in the region that the creators were releasing them to even know about them for the most part, you know,
right,
unless you had a
100%.
few rare gems like Too Much Coffee Man or Milk and Cheese and whatever that would somehow make it into Diamond eventually. But that
Right,
was because they were so they'd made the rounds, you know,
right.
people started
They
knowing.
just pushed into the culture.
Right, but like a truly indie book, like something that was new, you had no way of even knowing about it. Even the internet wasn't really what it is today. Like you would have to know the exact address that you were going to find it at to even,
Right,
you know,
very true.
like so so yeah, you're totally right. Like the indie books that you would see, I mean, they weren't that great. Like let's be honest, they
Right,
weren't that great. Or if they were, they weren't getting in front of the kind of people that could get them that exposure that they deserved, and to get them in the hands of readers. So you had stuff like heavy metal that kind of collected all these people together and curated them to an extent, and that was like a window into all these different kinds of possibilities. You had people doing watercolors for their comics. You had people doing colored pencils, or like you were saying, heavy inks and ink washes and stuff that you would just never see in a Marvel
Yep.
book, unless it was like Alex Ross doing it or something. But
Right.
even then, that had a very particular kind of look. But
I remember, I want to say it was like 97, 98, the Generation X comic, which was kind of like it was the young kids
oh yeah,
X-Men book. They had
yeah,
they had hired, and this was, I don't remember what the impetus was for it. All I know is that one day they were advertising for it. It was in Wizard magazine, and they did Gen X Underground. And it was literally, they were like, we hired all these underground artists, and the thing that stood out to me from the ads, and when I eventually got my hands on it, all the art was super super blocky. Like, all the faces were square, and like not square, but like, they were angular. There was just like a lot of angles to it, and I was so put off by it at the time. And I was like, I don't understand. Like, why would you even do this? Because there was so little exposure to that. Because they treated, like, Image treated itself like it was this great indie powerhouse. But the problem was, being a powerhouse, granted, they were indie, they were creator owned and things like that, they were still producing for the mainstream. So it didn't, they had to fall into certain boxes. I mean, like,
yeah.
you take a panel off of a Wildcats or a Stormwatch issue from 1995, compare it to an X-Men issue from 1995, it's going to be a hard pick as to which one's which. Like,
Hmm.
outside of
Yeah.
the characters themselves.
Other than like Eric Larson, Savage Dragon, and Sam Keith,
Right.
um,
Right. You had
Max,
standouts. Yeah, you had
and
standouts for
even
sure.
Todd McFarlane Spawn to an extent. But I mean, they were diamonds in the rough. The other guys, I still loved everything that they did, but they were still trying to kind of do what they were already doing at Marvel,
Right.
just their version of it.
Yep.
But yeah, it was, Image was a nice way to get another little taste of something else. Like the Max definitely stands out, I think.
Yeah, the
And as
Max was
far
a
as,
huge. That was like way off the wall. I remember. I mean,
oh yeah,
I'll be full transparency. I still have never read any of the Max, but like I am to this day trying to complete a Wizard magazine collection, and there
oh
was a lot of
nice,
features of the Max, and it was always so weird to me. The creatures with the giant mouths, with basically just a big head with a mouth and legs.
yeah,
I was like, what
the
is this
Izzy's.
thing? This is so weird.
Yeah.
But that,
Yeah, it's cerebral. It's one of those things that really, like, I don't know if it even really explains itself fully by the time you get through it, but it's worth the ride.
right, right. I'm always interested to see it. I know they did a animated series.
Which was also awesome. I loved that.
Good to know.
I
I
loved
know
all the
the
MTV.
Spawn animated series was really good. I remember that.
Yeah, that was
It was
good.
really good. I felt disappointed that there wasn't more of it, just because
Yeah,
there was supposed to be kind of, they set up a sequel. They set up a second season, but then
yeah,
they just never followed up on it, and that's probably due to contracts and all that stuff. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting thing now to see, because supposedly the script for a new Spawn movie is done.
yeah.
Supposedly a new animation house is working on a new animated series.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
I'm really excited. Like, I think that property is really cool. I think McFarlane he kind of did a dirty coming out of Marvel. He pulled like the best things of like Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, like Venom, smashed them all together,
Yeah.
and you got this really cool character, but also like super tortured, and like he just went all out. I mean, like, I think it was issue 5. He just outright killed one of the bad guys, like one of the main bad guys,
Oh, was it?
Billy
Was that the one
Kincaid.
that they introduced the Violator?
Billy Kincaid.
It's been a while.
Billy Kincaid
Oh,
shouldn't have
okay.
did what he did to those kids. Remember, he strung them up because he was the ice cream man.
Oh, you're talking about that one.
Yeah,
Yeah, McFarlane has actually talked about that story in different interviews. he was venting something in that. Like he was getting some issues out, I think.
Yeah, that was definitely, but it was one of those things like that was not, you didn't see that. You just didn't see that out of modern
Yeah,
heroes.
no.
I mean, I think even up until recently, in the last 5 years maybe, Wolverine didn't even kill. There was like some grievous wounds, but there was never a kill. You know, like
Yeah.
you knew he was in a war, you assumed he killed, but there was just never. There was never any kind of, that was weird. There was never any kind of, blood on the ground kind of thing. Whereas in Spawn in 90, what was it, 93, 94, you have this just flat out dead guy chained up, ice cream stuck up in his face. Like, it was gruesome. It was
Yeah,
gruesome.
it
But
was
like,
gruesome.
that was the kind of stuff that was the little rabbit hole you start going down. And that's when you touch into that, and then you get into other smaller image series that they started putting out a little bit later. In the late 90s, even Marvel hired some people that were not kind of in the polished category, and that's when the world kind of opened up to me personally as a reader, as a appreciator of the arts. Because to me, once I saw people who weren't like, I saw more angled art when they brought in what's his face, Humberto Ramos.
Mm.
He was on X Factor, if I recall correctly. No, Jeff Matsuda was on X Factor, but Jeff Matsuda was he was like one level away from like that clean, polished look. He had a little bit more angular to him. So then when Ramos came out, I think he was doing some other stuff in Wildstorm, but then they did that book series, the like imprint called Cliffhanger, and they kind of did their own stuff, and that's where Battle Chasers came out of. That's where Danger Girl came out of. He did the Crimson, and he's even more angular. But I was just like drawn to it. I was like, man,
Mm.
like what, like really cool. So like it's funny because of that kind of path. I am now really drawn to like exaggerated musculature and like
Cool.
it just I really dig it. Like on yesterday's show, which was the comic show, I looked at some of the new costumes that they debuted, the new suits, and Ironheart, which is Riri Williams, the replacement
Hmm.
for Iron Man. Her new armor has like really exaggerated features. Her arm muscles, her leg muscles are all like really kind of bulked out individually, and I'm like, this is super cool. My wife's like, it doesn't look human. I'm like, no, it doesn't matter. This looks cool. Like, it looks dope.
Cool.
You said you've switched disciplines a few times.
Oh yeah.
What, I mean, besides the hey, I want to try this out. You said you've been in film. Like, how did you go from art? I mean, when I last saw you before we reconnected in the last few years, you're still drawing, and I honestly always had just assumed that you were going to go into art. So
Hmm.
is film something? Did you like go to college for that? Did you, was that just like I'm just gonna jump on a set and see if I like it kind of thing?
It was actually total like a fluke. I was well, like my art journey, I guess you could say, has been a little like trepidatious. I've been kind of trying to like find what I can do for a living in art for a long time, and so I've tried a lot of different things. And when I first went to school, out of high school, I spent like a year working in construction with my uncle, and like just doing stuff like that, pretty much
Sure.
working in a warehouse and for UPS and whatever. And I finally just snapped and was like, I can't, like, this isn't me. Like, I could do this, but like, it's
But you
killing
hate,
me.
yeah, you hate yourself. I feel you.
Yeah. Well, and like I loved art so much, and like I found that working the kind of jobs that I was taking was like taking a toll on my shoulder, my hands, all that stuff. And I was genuinely scared. Like, hey, I might not be able to do the stuff that I love anymore if I continue doing this stuff for work, you know?
Yeah, that'd be rough.
So I went to college, and at the time, uh, games were exploding. That was like the big thing. And I loved video games. Like
Sure.
that was like another kind of passion too. I had taught myself to code, and I'd made a couple like small little, uh, like just small games. Like I made a platformer game and a space shooter game that were pretty much clones of games of that type. But they were fun. And so I thought, hey, I kind of have a knack for this stuff. Maybe I can make a career out of that. So I went to school for it, and that's sort of what started it. Because the school that I went to was not very focused. So rather than streamlining the education of the students and getting them into jobs, we learned just a crap ton of different things. So I learned all
That's
about
cool.
Photoshop, and I learned all about 3D, and I also had to take fine art classes and design classes
Oh
and
wow.
all this different stuff that I'd never been exposed to before. And like it was just clicking because it was new and it was fun, and it all had to do with art in some way, you know?
Sure.
And then there was actually periods where I was so I was so I don't know, like just on a high of learning new things and feeling like anything was possible, that I started thinking like, well, maybe I would do level design, and to help me learn level design more, I'll start taking interior design for a while. And so I signed up for interior design, and I didn't last more than like a week in that course, but yeah, that started kind of a trend of me just like really wanting to try a bunch of different things, you know? And I stayed in school for a while. Well, 6 years, and eventually I transferred out to California, where I landed my first job in games. I was doing testing at the time, but it was kind of like I was a tester, but I was also being looked at to work in the art department. So
Sure.
occasionally I got to hand in samples to the art director there, and he was giving me kind of like tips and pointers, like whether that was good or not, or whether it can work with a games engine, et cetera, et cetera.
Gotcha.
And so some circumstances happened, and I had to leave. Not that company, but the state. I had to come back home, and so I came back home. I was lost for a little while. Went back to school to try to hopefully finagle like an internship thing again, but it wasn't happening. I came back like as soon as companies started closing down here in Chicago. Like Midway was shutting down.
Yeah.
Um,
I
Giant,
remember
I think it
that.
was called Giant Hippo or something. There was like three companies that were worth getting an internship at that were just gone all of a
Right.
sudden. So I did my own thing for a while, or I should say, tried to, and kind of freelanced doing concept art or 3D models or like level design kind of stuff. Nothing too serious that really amounted to anything. Um, and then eventually, after doing that for about 7 years and really not getting anywhere, it was frustrating. And I had to start taking all kinds of other jobs again too. Like I worked at Goose Island for a little while as a bartender, which I
Nice.
don't drink, so that was like a weird thing for me.
That is kind of strange pairing.
It is, but I was kind of at my wit's end, to be honest, and like I was really starting to question all my life's decisions. It was like, well, what the hell did I do, And like this whole time that I'd been doing all of these things, like the one thing that I really actually wanted to be doing was comics, but I never thought that that was like a career. I never even bothered to really even look into it. I just figured that's impossible. So cross that off the list.
Sure.
But I always was working on my stories in my free time throughout all of this stuff. And so I started diving into comics again, like hardcore. And I started going to the library and taking out a bunch of books and like studying up, brushing up on my drawing and like really just learning. But that wasn't paying the bills. And it was getting to be like a few months that I was doing that. And it wasn't happening fast enough. Like I wasn't getting good enough fast enough to even see the light at the end of the tunnel that I could make a career out of it. And so my buddy, I know this is a long story, but I promise
No,
it
no,
actually,
no.
and it ends up where answering the question. So my buddy went to school for film, and he had been working in film for several years, and he'd been trying to convince me to get involved with him for a long time. And I'd written some screenplays with him before. I'd helped out with different special effects kind of stuff with him before, or like stand in to help with lighting or whatever, just because we're friends and just because I pick up things very quickly. So
Sure.
it was easier for him to call me rather than like try to get an intern or somebody else that he would have to explain a bunch of stuff to. So I had a little bit of experience working with him, and so I figured, what the hell? And this was during a year where I decided to make some changes in my life. I was just going to say yes to everything. And that led to a lot of different adventures and things that I'd never done before. And one of which was saying yes to help him on a feature film, which is crazy. It was the first thing that I ever did in film was like 3 months in the freezing cold of February, going back and forth from here in Chicago to Gary, Indiana, to this abandoned like warehouse industrial district, like shooting a zombie film.
Nice.
And he works in the art department, so it was a lot of like, take this cornstarch and mix it with this and splatter it all over this abandoned meat locker. Okay, cool. Like sweet.
That's outstanding.
And
That's
like we
outstanding.
would make like these dummies and all kinds of stuff. And I would hang out in the makeup trailer with all the special effects people, and that's when I really started seeing how I could put like sculpting and stuff to use in a different way, because they all were doing these crazy sculptures and making these like body suits and different prosthetics for the zombies and all of that. And so, one thing led to another, and I got friendly with everybody there because I was just Johnny on the spot. Like, I was, do you need something? I can try to do my best. That's just my personality.
Right.
And so I made friends with everybody there, and the director loved me, and he actually requested. He tried to get a hold of me for another thing. So he was talking to people like, "Who was that guy? Can you get a hold of him? I want him for another shoot." And so I worked with him like 3 or 4 times after that on like smaller things, like different commercials and promotional kind of stuff for different comedy troupes and stuff in Chicago.
Very cool.
And I remember on one shoot, this was like a year or maybe even more, at least a year after we'd worked together on his feature, that it was like a mini road trip, and I was driving with him up to Wisconsin for there was a comedy troupe who was trying to start a YouTube channel. So they had like their stand-up sets and their different skits that they did live, they would record, and he was responsible for recording all of that too and producing the whole thing. But then they had these other like scripted like video pieces that they wanted to put together. And so we went up to this super fancy house. It was crazy, and all these just super funny people to film this like crazy skit about, like, I don't know, some kind of graduation thing. I don't even remember. There was a pool and a blow up alligator, and it was a great time. But but I remember on that
I feel
trip
like
he
that should be a
actually
t-shirt.
said like,
It was a
yeah,
bull and an alligator. It was a great time.
that would make a great t-shirt. But no, on that trip he said, well, you've been working in film for a while. Like, what did you do before Chrysalis, which is the movie that he made? And I was like, nothing, man. That was my first thing. He's like, really? I was like, yeah, like that was the first time I'd ever been on a set. He's like, get out of here.
Wow.
And so that was just kind of like a funny moment, but it led to getting even more work. And eventually I didn't have to count on all the contacts that my buddy was setting me up with. I was totally on my own, and people were starting to request me for all kinds of stuff. So I got to do commercials for like that show 24. They did a cross promotional with
Oh, wow.
Sprint. So if you ever saw, there was like a period of time where they were doing this. They were about to relaunch the series, I think. I don't quite remember. But there was these commercials for Sprint where there was this guy, and he was like, "This is the contact. Your code number is blah blah blah." So we made that whole set, and it was awesome.
Wow.
And actually, from stop motion to that set, just in like how different materials work together and how different glues work, which proved to be a lifesaver for everybody that day, because our walls were literally falling down during the shoot. And I kept trying to speak up and say something. And I was kind of saying it with authority because I knew exactly what I was talking about, but the person that I was working for did not want to hear it. They're like, yeah, whatever, dude. Like, but I finally, she finally listened at the end of the day, and it totally saved the day. So then that started another chain reaction of getting more jobs and getting more work. And so, yeah, it was pretty awesome. And I really enjoyed it. So much that, it actually ended up evolving to me going from being a PA, which is essentially, get coffee, try not to get in trouble, and do whatever anybody asks you,
Right.
to being a production designer, which is like one of the three heads of the departments on any feature film. Like I had employees, and I had a budget, and I had, money that I had to spend, and things that were designed by me, and a whole feature film. It was insane, absolutely insane. But unfortunately, right before we started production, I popped my knee. And it wasn't while I was working, and it wasn't even doing anything exciting. I was literally just talking to the director, and we had just set everything in stone. Like we had just, uh, forwarded the contracts and everything, and agreed that we're moving forward. And in my excitement, I ran upstairs to, like, I forgot exactly what it was that I was even going upstairs to get, but I turned and twisted and popped my knee.
Oh,
And so I had to work for 3 months building. Like, even though I was a production designer, I also had to fill in as like an art director and do most of the construction myself.
right.
Not all by myself, but with a team. And it was just wreaking havoc on my knee. And on a tight schedule like that, especially because I'm head of a department, there was zero time for me to go to the doctor to even see what was wrong with this thing. And so
That
by the end of
sucks.
that shoot, my knee was destroyed, and to this day, I can't kneel anymore. It doesn't happen. And so I had to
Damn.
stop doing that work. There was just no way for me to move forward in that career anymore unless I was actually able to get hands on and build things, which I just couldn't. Um, and that really sucked. That was really hard because any other contacts that I had that could have maybe gotten me work doing, more design oriented stuff, they started moving out to LA and like really getting more deeply involved in the industry, and
Sure,
moving
sure.
up the ladder as they should.
Right, right.
But my options were I could either go back to school and get OSHA certified and get, pretty much join the union, because that was the only way that I was going to make it on my own anymore. And that just, it wasn't an option anymore. And so I made the best of a bad situation and was like, all right, great. Well, I'm going to go back to comics then. And the rest is kind of history, I suppose. Uh, but yeah, so that's how I got involved in film. Um, Stop motion was a result of that too. One of the producers for that first feature that I worked on actually contacted me, I think about a year later, because she had heard that I was meddling around with stop motion at the time, and so that led to that as well. So everything that I've done has actually kind of led to something else. So I've never been shy about like trying new things, or you know,
That's
extending
no,
myself into
that's
different
definitely
areas.
like a great lesson to learn out of all that because you don't know what's gonna work. You don't know what's gonna hit for you.
Yeah.
I think that the story is an incredible lesson, especially for people coming up because like you said, there were a lot of hiccups there. There was a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
a lot of pitfalls, and
Oh yeah.
you navigated them with expert precision. Uh,
I don't know about that, but I'm alive.
hey, you made it, and now you're doing what you want to do again, and it's I think that's like the most beautiful thing, honestly. I am personally like very early in the beginning of my journey, and I like the concept of like being just like waking up and doing what I want and then going to sleep to do it again the next day is like the most like amazing thing for me, and like that's what keeps me going. So
Yeah.
like knowing that like regardless of what happens, you can still get that done. Like I mean, like I said, you've dealt with a lot there. That's just in that abridged version of the story. Like
Yeah.
there's
That's
a
just the
lot.
career aspect. There's
Right? Yeah. Of course, of course. There's life is always happening regardless of what you're doing for work.
very true.
So yeah, there's always going to be hiccups. There's always going to be roadblocks, but y- man, you just push forward and So now you're working on comics. You started working on Space Cat, and then you were talking about a Space Cat web comic, and I'm still waiting for Space Cat, Mike. When
Yeah.
is this happening?
Well, if all goes well, I intend to have the script for issue one done this year. My original plan at the start of this year was to have issue one done. And that's still possible, but it's not I don't have the same time frame that I had when I first decided that was going to be a reality. But I still have every intention of trying. So it really hinges on how long it takes for me to get this next heavy metal comic done, which I've kind of I've called an audible, I guess, and I'm calling in a little bit of help. One of my good friends that I've made since starting this whole comics journey, Gaz Gretzky. You should totally look up his stuff online too. He's an amazing artist and a good friend. We're gonna do it's not our idea. I need to start by saying that two other awesome artists, Joshua Kemble and Corey Kerr, came up with this idea for this 48-hour art check-in. I still don't know exactly what it's called, but every other day pretty much they report to each other publicly online on YouTube, and they do like a short little like 15 to 20 minute show where they say like, this is what I intended to accomplish in these last few days. This is what I accomplished. These were my pitfalls. This is what I'm going to try to do better next time. Kind of that kind of thing, an accountability sort of thing. And they encouraged everybody else to try it too. So Gaz and I are going to start that actually next Tuesday. So we're going to do a weekly thing though. So my point is that I really hope this is going to help me get more on track, and I know that it's going to help him too, because no matter who you are and how disciplined you get, like working for yourself, working from home, it is so much harder than I think a lot of people realize. It sounds easy and it sounds like the life, but
100%.
in some ways it's not. It's worse because you have so much more accountability that no one is holding you to but
Yep.
yourself, you know?
Yep.
And the repercussions aren't apparent until it's too late, because again,
Right.
no one else is keeping track but you. So it's like, okay, need to pay the rent. Oh, no money. Like,
There are no dollars. What is happening?
yeah. Oh man, maybe I shouldn't have played Call of Duty or whatever. Um, I'm not that big on video games, but I have been, and I've learned that I just need to stay away completely. um, but yeah, so my point is, I'm hoping that doing these weekly check-ins is going to help keep me more on task, and then and I'll hopefully crank this comic out as quickly as possible. It's only 16 pages, but
Okay.
I like everything. I try to set up like things that I'm bad at. I want to do those things, and so just like with my last comic, I'm doing that for this one, where like I'm focusing on things that I'm no good at, and
Gotcha.
hoping that I can learn through this. So it's going to be about a month that I'm taking. I'm already through the first week of that month.
Nice.
30 days that I'm taking to just focus on like the preliminary stuff. So like I'm doing a lot of concept art. I'm doing a lot of like studies. I'm going through and brushing up on my anatomy, like specific anatomy for the kind of characters that I want to make. Different things with dynamic posing, and I'm teaching myself watercolors. Actually, I just bought the paper yesterday, and I've actually been doing a little bit here since we've been talking.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So, because I want to color the whole thing in watercolors, is I just absolutely love that aesthetic, and I'm gonna give that a shot. But once my 30 days is up, then whatever I know, and that's the tool set I have to go into this project with. And so after that, you know, the goal is like a page a day, but I'm probably not going to hit that, but we'll see. And
Hey.
then I'll start working on Space Cat after that,
Hey,
like as soon as I'm done with that.
I'm excited. I'm super excited about Space Cat. I'm super excited hopefully to see your book in in heavy metal. I think that'd be amazing.
Oh man, that'd be so cool.
I honestly think your style lends itself very very well to what's in there, to like what I've seen in heavy metal.
Yeah, I think so too, actually.
it really jams in with what's there.
Yeah, especially when I'm like on all cylinders, you know. Like I've definitely developed kind of a new style over these last few years that's a little bit more light and all inclusive, I should say. But But yeah, when I'm firing on all cylinders, I really think that I have kind of more of like an urban, gritty, weird sort of aesthetic that I think fits well with that too.
Right,
Um,
for sure.
and I'm gonna kind of try to combine them a little bit, and also come up with something new for this next comic. So we'll see what that looks like. So far, I've only seen little glimpses of it actually coming through in the concept stuff that I've been doing, but that tells me that it's possible. So hopefully at the end of the 30 days, I'll have something. I'll have like a proof of concept. It's like, yes, that's what it's gonna be.
Excellent.
But
Excellent.
yeah, and actually, you don't have to wait for heavy metal because heavy metal's contracts are super loose. So I'm allowed to publish it elsewhere. So I'm actually going to
Oh,
be publishing all my stuff on my Patreon before it's ever published in heavy metal. I mean,
very
they give
cool.
you a time frame of like, well, it could be tomorrow, it could be 5 years. So, um,
For
but yeah,
those listening, watching in the future, I think everyone is aware of my just utter shamelessness in plugs, and I would just like to tip my hat, sir, because that was the sneakiest, best. It was just
that
like,
wasn't a
by the way,
plug.
Patreon. It was just like that was brilliant. That was brilliant, and tip my hat, sir. That was
Well, honestly, I wasn't
get
even
on that
trying to
Patreon.
plug.
Get on the Patreon.
I really wasn't even trying to plug. I
that's
really
that's
wasn't.
dude, that but that's the best way when it's just built into your conversation. You're like, oh, it's going to be going on the Patreon. Boom, like that's informational and it's enticing, right? Because it's not just like, hey, hook it up on Patreon. It's this is why you should go to Patreon. It's
That's
good.
right.
I like that. I like that. Should teach classes in that.
Actually, I mean, and again, I'm not trying to make a plug, but this is just a matter of fact thing. Like, I'm not releasing any of my comics in any other way except for print right now.
Hmm.
And so, if it's not in print, the only place that I'm releasing it is Patreon until I figure out how that's going to work out. Because I'd like to go through publishers if I can, because I want my stuff to be read by as many people as possible, you know. But that takes time, and I'm impatient, and I want people to read it. So. That's like the
I'm
best
with you.
place that I could think of because
I'm with you.
most publishers are actually that's like a safe zone. If I were to publish it on Webtoons or Tapastic or any of those other places, they look at that more as like published, like you've released it publicly. But Patreon, they tend to be okay. They'll still take your work if you've published on Patreon, so it's kind of
Right.
like a nice little safe zone.
Plus, it's also like a exclusive thing, right? You're giving exclusive previews
Right?
to people who follow you, to people who are actually contributing to you. So
Yeah.
I think I really like the Patreon model. I think it's very interesting as far
And
as supporting people because there's such a disconnect. I think there is a huge there's a huge kind of belief from the user base on the internet that everything should be free on the internet
yeah.
and you run into problems. You know, you have people that use ad blockers on YouTube, being like, "Oh, those greedy YouTubers." But like, yeah, but some of those people like depend on those ad dollars for bread.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's not everyone's making money off of it, but some people are, and like it's kind of a jerk move. You know, that's why when I bought uh, I wanted uh, Google Play Music, but it came with YouTube Red, and I was like bonus because that's what I want. I want I don't like watching ads, so like, but I still want to support. Like if I'm watching your
Right.
content, I feel like you should get something out of it. That's just my
Yeah.
personal belief.
Yeah.
So, if I'm taking your 3 to 5 hours of work to create a 10-minute video, because that's the other thing people consider. Like they look at, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but they look at something where, oh, I need a logo done, and you say, well, this is how much it's going to be. Oh, well, I've got Photoshop, I'll come up with something.
Yeah. You'll come up with something great.
Right, right. And then that's it. It really, really, really bothers me when people try to go down that route and essentially try to avoid paying people for their work.
Yeah.
And then they devalue. They surely artists. I think artists and creators in general are devalued by the consumer a lot.
Yeah.
They just like you love drawing, right? Just draw me a free piece, or draw me a Superman, right? No big deal.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that too comes from sort of like a collective perceived insecurity too. You know, a lot of
True.
artists, especially young, and I mean young as in age young. There, you could be a young artist and be 50 and
Right.
you're just starting, but I mean specifically like young as in age young.
Sure.
There's a lot of insecurities when you're growing up, you know, and when you're an artist, you're insecure about not only yourself but your art at that time. And I feel like that's the age when you start to kind of get influenced by that perception that your talent should be free. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
it's it's a big thing to ask somebody to even look at it, let alone appreciate it. You know, and especially if you're still maturing in your art form and it's not quite there yet, it's like it instills this insecurity that almost doesn't go away, almost like a kind of a trauma, you know? And so you have these people that grow up and feel like, well, I'm just blessed that anyone's even looking at it, which to some extent, sure, that's true. But I also see art as just as much of a trade as it is an art. And if you're good at your trade, then you deserve to be paid for it, and you deserve that recognition, just like a carpenter, just like a plumber, just like anybody else.
For
Um,
sure. For sure. I mean,
and
you look at something like I've got tile on my floor in the kitchen, and I don't know why, but I've been thinking about redoing the tile recently. Don't know why. It's just like a thing in my head. But I'm like, I could do it myself. I'm like, or I could pay someone to do it, and they'd do it well. Like I could do it myself. I'm sure. I'm sure
yeah,
if I took the time and made the mistakes, I could bang it out in a couple days. I'm sure. Or I could pay someone, they'll come in here in an hour, use their 40, 50 years of experience or 20 or 10 years of experience and just bang it out.
yeah,
And it'll be good. It'll be done well with the proper precautions taken, with the proper measurements. Like it, it's one thing to like go to Home Depot and buy the tools. It is 100% different thing to know what to do with them.
yeah,
like
definitely.
I was toying around for a while with buying a router, which is an actual. I don't know if you know. I mean, like you were in
Oh
construction,
yeah,
you know what a router is.
yeah.
For those who don't know, it's how you make like beveled edges and things like that on wood. Because I was gonna redo my own stairs, and
Oh
I watched
man.
like 15 videos, and I was like, no. I'm like, there's a lot of control involved. No, I'm just gonna no. I was like, no, I could do it. It's only like a $70, $80 tool. Like I could knock it. And then I watch videos and I'm like, no, no. This requires skill, finesse. I'm like things that I can cut wood, and sometimes it's a straight line. That's where I'm at. Like I know my bar, and that's I think a lot of people, a lot of consumers don't kind of see their own limitations in that,
Mhm.
especially with digital arts. People will say stuff like, "Oh, I've got Photoshop, I can knock it out." Oh, WordPress is free, right? I could just make my own website. You
Yeah,
absolutely could, but you can't make WordPress dance like I can.
right.
Like, it's just different. It's different. Like, there's
Yeah,
just isn't. There's an element that is experience that you can't replicate.
that's where I feel like, it's people will only understand if we change things somehow. And I think because of the digital age came so fast, there wasn't a whole lot of time to sit down and actually think about, well, where are things going and how's this going to wind up? And for a lot of people, artists specifically, they were excited just to finally get that much exposure all at once, you know?
Yes.
But now, all right, we're used to it now. Now this is a fact of life.
Right.
This is not exposure anymore. Like this is you're giving away free stuff at this point.
Right.
Anybody can copy anything that you've posted and turn it into a wallpaper or whatever that they want to use it for, and that's a reality we all have to face. So I think artists need to start limiting their like what they put out there for free, and I think that's completely reasonable. It goes back to like we were talking about the 90s before. Remember Ashcans? Like when's the last time you saw
Yes.
an Ashcan?
But I think that's the kind of thing you should bring back. Like I
That's what
think
I'm
people
saying.
people
Yeah.
should if you go to like I would rather this is 100% God's honest truth. If I go to a convention, I would much rather 1,000% rather walk up to a table and instead of buying somebody's art print of Green Lantern, buy an Ashcan of their work.
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm here to see you. I've seen Green Lantern. I know Superman.
Yep.
Cool. I appreciate that you make a really cool Nightwing drawing. That's outstanding. That's great. What do you do? Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that everyone should do that. If you are just the art talent and just want to do art, there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's also kind of a misconception these days in that everyone should be the creator and everyone should create something. Whereas many shows,
you don't have to.
I meet people who just draw. They just draw. They draw really, really well, but they don't have their own properties and they don't have their own books because they just really want to draw. They can accept an instruction, say draw this, do it that way, and they do that. Like,
yeah. But to that point about the Ashcans and bringing it back, I absolutely agree. I think that we can even extend that into the digital realm too by a kind of general consensus among artists and among people that post things digitally online that like, hey, stop giving out the whole thing for free, but feel free to post your first chapter, like entice people, get them interested, of course.
Yeah,
or
I fully
post
believe
the
that you
first
should.
issue or whatever, but find some kind of consensus where we can put a stop to having the norm be that we need to give away our hard work entirely for free before we're ever allowed to make a dime off of it. I don't think that's fair at all.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair at all because you got a lot of people that will follow the web comics or whatever. They're loyal fans and they're greatly appreciated. Don't get me wrong. But then when it comes time to actually make the book sale to put food on the table for that person, where is everybody? I mean, there's some really successful Kickstarters, but do you honestly think that everybody that read it is even pitching in $1? Like, it starts to get a little sketchy, and it starts to get a little grim, actually. That's why a lot of people say there's no money in comics. Well, we have to make sure that there is. Like, they're really popular right now. They're a commodity, just like anything else. And
absolutely. I mean,
creators should
somebody was
monetize
picking up their books yesterday, and they were like, "Oh, is the new what was it? Jeepers Creepers comic? Is that out?" I was like the movie from like 1998. You talking about Jeepers Creepers comic? But yeah, apparently there's a new Jeepers Creepers series, and like there's a bunch of stuff there's a John Wick comic, which like those movies were great. They sold tons of money, and then they're like, oh, guess what? Let's tap into this other market, get a few more dollars out of comics. Guess what? I didn't know there was a John Wick comic. No, they put it in the comic shop, and they expect that you, having likely seen all these comic book movies, know about John Wick, and are like, oh, hey, I'm into John Wick. Let me pick this up.
Yeah.
Like and I think that the difference in the modern day, and I think this is kind of where a lot of difference can be drawn from like now versus 30 years ago. The difference now is there is no barrier for entry. I've talked to people. I talked to on the Wednesday show a couple weeks ago. I talked to Michael Heitkamper. He is the creator of a couple books that go through Insane Comics in Rockford, and he said that there is still like a huge barrier just to get into Diamond. And Diamond is the authority. Yep. I talked to Comfort Love and Adam Withers. They created the Uniques and Rainbow in the Dark. Rainbow in the Dark, one of my favorite storylines of all time. And they had their first and second volume of the Uniques. They started remaking the original book, and then they're continuing the storyline. The first and second volume were through Diamond, but because there were so few pre-orders, they couldn't go back in.
Oh.
They had an issue, and because people don't conceptualize the importance of pre-ordering, they're like, "I'll just pick it up from you. I'll just pick it up from you at the show." That's not the point. That's not the
same
point.
thing happened with our Kickstarter. I had a bunch of people that were messaging me congratulating us on the successful Kickstarter, and then they were like, let me know when I can buy the book. And I'm like, you could have.
Yeah, that's what the
You could have
Kickstarter
bought it,
is.
and it would have been cheaper for you if you bought it then versus now. But I don't
Man.
understand. Like, there's an apprehensiveness about using Kickstarter for some reason, or
Huh.
just an unwillingness to learn. I
I
got
mean,
some messages from some people that were just like, "Oh, I don't know how to use Kickstarter, so just let me know when I can buy the book."
sure. And I mean, I think there is a stigma to it because I know they're prior to their more recent rules, and more recent as in like the last 5 years, let's say. But prior to their more recent rules of like you have to produce something, before there's a lot of horror stories of like $2 million projects
Yeah,
that never produced a thing.
yeah. I know you and I have talked about some of that too. Like you're still waiting on a comic
I'm
from
still
like
waiting
6
on a
years ago,
seven-year
right?
old book, you know.
Call him out, man. Put him on blast right here now.
But that's the thing, you know.
No, for real.
He's still pushing forward. He's still doing what he loves. But the problem is, you can enjoy doing what you do. Like as a creator, you could, if you're an artist and you want to draw, that's fantastic. But don't then set a timeline for yourself. Don't set a goal for yourself if you can't meet it. Not even a little bit. You
Yeah,
know.
I mean, there's a difference. Like, you can be an artist and do whatever you want, that's fine. But if you want to be a professional, and I mean taking people's money,
Yep.
at that point you have a responsibility. Like, not even just as an artist, as a human being. Like, that's just wrong. Straight up wrong. I wish I remembered the name because I'd call him out for you 'cause it's bullshit.
Oh, I
But
don't mind saying I
seriously
don't mind
though,
saying it. It's Sean Aline. Sean Aline. The
there
book
you
is
go.
called
Sean,
Azan.
come on, man.
The
Get the
book is called
comic.
Azan. I'm still waiting for that book. Listen, I really like the concept of the book. Like I'm interested in the universe. I'm in. I'm already bought in, and that's the thing. That's the problem. It's not that I backed him and I'm just like on principle mad about it. It's that
Right.
I really want to be in this universe. I want the stories told. Tell me the stories. Like that's what I want to be part of the world. You know, like I'm in the space cat camp already. You just let me issue one's out. I'm there. Done. You know, like it's already we're bought in. Doesn't matter. That's why I was talking yesterday. I'm like I don't need to see a trailer for Captain Marvel. I'm going to see Captain Marvel.
Yeah, that looks pretty
That's
cool.
I'm already in. Haven't seen a single scene. I've seen a couple like on set shots. I know the suit's not done because like they're gonna post it, so
Yeah.
it's gonna look better. But like I don't even care. It could look exactly as the way it does without any post. I'd still watch the movie because I don't care. Like I'm already so sold into that universe. You could sell me anything at this point. If you want to make a Squirrel Girl movie, I'm in. Marvel, I'm in.
Oh man, I'd be in. I would take that.
Like that's what I'm saying. Like it doesn't matter at this point. Like we're so far beyond. Whereas like if Fox was like, well, we really want to do like an Iceman feature. No, no, no.
What do you got against Iceman?
It's not even Iceman. I'm just really terrified that Fox would mess it up.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
their standards for quality film are not great. I mean, I'm
Well,
sorry.
now
Like
it might be Comcast. Did you hear the news today?
they are not
Comcast
buying
wants
it.
to outbid Disney.
Disney is like God.
I
Can't
know.
outbid the God of media. Like
Well, if Disney is God, then Comcast is like
the devil. and a better
Sure.
and a better analogy could never have been made.
good call, good call.
Oh, that's great. That was great. That's fantastic. And I honestly, I think we should close it at that because it doesn't get better than that. It doesn't get better than that.
Nope.
Mike, I want to thank you for hanging out with us. I really appreciate the insights. You've had a really interesting story, a really interesting career. I am super psyched. I can't wait for the next thing and all the things that you'll be producing coming up. I'm
Awesome.
rooting for
Thanks,
you
man.
for heavy metal.
Thank
I was gonna say full metal, but I'm like, I know that's not it. I know it's not
Well, if they don't take me, I'll start my own magazine, Full Metal.
full metal. There you go.
Full Metal Comcast. I don't know.
Full Metal Comcast. I'm hoping you get in. I'm super psyched. I don't buy magazines. That's like a $20 magazine, isn't it? This is a pricey one.
No, it's like $6, I think.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
That's shit for these. Did you got like 6 books in that?
More than that sometimes. It
I'm
depends.
saying that's cheap.
They
You got DC putting out a single story for $4. What the hell?
yeah, they have they do like long running like graphic novels they'll put in here. So sometimes you'll get a story that spans over like 9 issues. And then they have little like 1 to 2 page like fill-in stories, 8 page stories, 16 page
It's kind of the
stories.
modern. It's kind of the modern pulp magazine. It's the modern fantasy books.
Yeah, yeah. It's like an anthology, you
Like
know?
all your favorite folks, if you don't know, all your favorite stories ever came from people who were putting out stuff on a monthly basis. They put out Lord of the Rings came out as individual chapters
Hmm.
in a like a
Yeah,
regular
actually,
magazine
that's true. Forgot about that.
over several years. Imagine you could go pick up the whole 1,000 page collection, read the whole thing tomorrow if you wanted to.
Yeah.
People
A
had
lot
to
of
wait years to see what happened to Frodo.
a lot of great artists got their start in heavy metal too. Jean Giraud, Mobius,
Hmm.
um, Jodorowsky, Simon Bisley,
Ooh,
um,
Beasley, nice.
Michael Lisner, the
Wait,
creator of Vampirella. I can't remember.
Dawn Michael Answer?
Yeah, he's
No
done. I'm pretty sure
shit.
he's done covers, if not
No shit.
actual comics.
Although I could see
A lot
that.
of
I could see that.
love him.
That was another kind of like indie thing that was like really kind of off the wall. Like his all his stuff always seemed very symbolic.
Yeah, yeah.
Like everything, every piece of art I ever saw from Dawn, I was like, it seems like because I never really read any of the books, but
Mhm.
when Wizard would talk about it, they would interview. It would always seem like everything, like there were no panels. It was just like these single images that you just had to interpret what the fuck was going on.
Pretty much, yeah.
And I was like, man, that seems just too deep for me. Like,
Well, another guy that I'm extremely excited about this actually. He's one of my favorites from heavy metal. Enrico Marini. He just did a run of Batman that looks freaking phenomenal,
nice.
and it's coming out in trade in like I want to say November. But it's all watercolor, and it's
Ooh,
beautiful,
ooh.
absolutely beautiful. And I didn't think that somebody could some do redesigns that could compare to some of the ones that we've seen, but he's really done some amazing redesigns of some of these characters. His Joker, I really love it. It looks so cool. Definitely worth checking. And here I am plugging somebody else. Oh,
Right?
geez.
Just plug it. Always plug it.
SpaceCatComics.com. What am I
Oh,
talking about?
Space Cat comment. Right
Yeah.
down that way. That way. No, this way. This way. I can't even point the right way. All the
But
links. Make sure you check them out. For those listening, watching in the future, Tomahawk, welcome to the end of this broadcast. Welcome. We were talking with Mike Emeritz. Check out the links. Check out the links down below. Check them out. Spacecatcomics.com. Oh, hey, I appreciate that. Spacecatcomics.com. He's producing an independent series. He's also working on some stuff going towards a heavy metal submission. Also, this broadcast will be available as a video and podcast on all the major things: iTunes podcasts, Stitcher, and whatever Google Play Music is going to turn into in about 2 weeks. I know they're changing the platform, so that's a thing. Those listening,
dude,
watching in the future, if you are watching, make sure you drop some comments down below. If you have any questions for Mike, I'll make sure he comes back to the video and answers any questions. And if you
I
are,
just realized, man,
Mhm.
we never even mentioned the anthology. You can buy the anthology.
You can buy the anthology on spacecatcomics.com.
You can. And it's got work for me and Dalibor
It's
in there.
true. It's true.
As well
It's
as
my first published work,
yeah.
first and only published work so far.
See?
So
There you go. Incentive.
incentive. Check it out. Support me. Support Mike. Appreciate you guys for watching. If you are listening to us, make sure you join us next week when we do another one of these with somebody else and talk about different stuff. But it's always in the pursuit of your passion as a business, doing what you love for a living. Thank you again, Mike, for hanging out with us. Thank you those for watching, for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
Adios.